So initially it started out as a documentary just of a 5-week tour. That was what it was supposed to be?
Yeah.
Well, we didn't even know it was 5. We at the beginning thought, after we'd spent time with Glen, he was charming, he was funny, his music was great, but we could not imagine that he could get on stage and perform before, 2,000 people with Alzheimer's, because his short-term memory was non-existent. So we had the expectation that initially that maybe we would film a couple of shows. We thought it was optimistic that they would do 5 weeks.
But he would. The thing that was also fascinating was that he would come and go, meaning that he would be very, very clear, and he'd know that he had Alzheimer's. He knew what the end result was. He knew what the game he was playing. He could crack his jokes, and then he'd repeat exactly what he just had said. So, it was fascinating, and the thing that was really so beautiful was that a guy at his most vulnerable walked out onto the stage, and you'd think that the audience would, they'd boo him when he screwed up. It was the opposite. They lifted him up. They knew as soon as it's so interesting when you tell the truth, which is what Glen would say, tell the truth. He told the world the truth, what he was going through. Instead of most people, they don't want to tell the truth. They don't want the elephant. They want to pretend the elephant's not in the room. Mm-hmm. Glen's the opposite. He would laugh when he would say, one time when we were in Nashville and just before the Ryman show, the first Ryman show, he was sitting around a bunch of his friends. They all came over to have coffee with him before the show and see how old Glen was, feeling real sorry for him and real sad. And Glen's sitting there and he's joking around, and I said, "So how's the Alzheimer's going, Glen?" He said, "Well, I don't know, it sucks." And he said, so he said, "So how's the memory? What have you forgotten?" He said, "Well, why don't you tell me?" And then we'd tell him, and he'd start laughing about it. Mm-hmm. And then he'd remember that he'd forgotten. And so everybody in the room started getting okay with it. They became okay with him forgetting stuff, and they became okay with him not feeling guilty anymore about it. And that's what happened with the audience, and that's kind of what happens when people who have family members who have Alzheimer's or their caregivers see the film. They feel seen. They feel like it's okay, instead of it being a secret.
The interesting thing is, and it's anecdotal, we know so little about Alzheimer's, which we learned in the course of our 3 years, is we sort of had the assumption that once we started talking to doctors, we would get very clear on where we were in research, and we're close and all this stuff. And after 3 years, I think we realized they know very little about Alzheimer's. The research is in the infancy stage. It's like outer space, what we know about the brain. And so I think the amazing thing about Glen is he was the first public figure to come out and say, "I have Alzheimer's, and I'm going to continue showing people that I can still live a full life, and I can still perform, and I can still be creative." And when people would ask us, "Well, how is it possible that Glen can do this? How can he have Alzheimer's and still play music?" Nobody really has the answer. Doctors will theorize about it, and there's lots of people working on Alzheimer's research, but nobody still understands it. And one of the reasons is, as James was saying, there's a lot of shame with Alzheimer's, which means that a lot of people don't talk about it, people don't want to talk about it, and therefore there's not a lot of money for research in Alzheimer's. The statistics on money for cancer and heart disease, I think it's $6 billion or something, and there's only $600 million spent a year on Alzheimer's research. So anyway.
And it will affect 1 out of 2 people sitting in this room who are at the age of 85.
And we knew nothing about Alzheimer's when he started this movie.
The statistics are unbelievably staggering. 44 million people have it worldwide right now. 5.5 million people have it in the United States, which affects 15 million people.
And we don't treat it, right? It's basically
there's no treatment.
There's no treatment. There's no way to slow it down. So the idea, of course, is to create an awareness of it, and then Glen's kind of, we hope, becomes the Magic Johnson of Alzheimer's. He puts a face, a human face to it, because you connect emotionally with this guy, you fall in love with him, and all of a sudden, we're going to do something about it, because everybody, hopefully, is blessed to feel that way about their own family, and they don't want to see themselves go through this. It's not like we figure we're going to find a cure, but at least find something to slow it down. But more to the point of the Ed Markey said it. He said it's not the Al Qaeda or ISIS you should be worried about. It's the diagnosis of Alzheimer's. He said, by the year 2050, 150 million people will have it worldwide, and it's going to exceed the national defense budget by the year 2025, and it'll break our economy. It just will. Because and nobody. And the other thing is that people who have Alzheimer's, they can't speak for themselves.
Right.
So we have to speak for them. So that's our hope as filmmakers, is that enough people see the film, it gets enough recognition, and it's palpable for people to see and not get depressed. Glen is so uplifting. There's many laughs in this movie. I hope, as there are tears. So. Mm-hmm.